when we say the word common ancestor, we think of individual, the way that our ancestors are individuals, but it's better to think of it almost like a population of interacting things which contained all this stuff, which then continued to evolve and diversified into all the myriad life forms that we see today. But it wasn't just one organism. And this could be a population of things that are competitors, are cooperators, are pathogens. Like, it doesn't have to be just like an organismal-like population. Just think of it more like an actual real-world ecosystem.
Right.
With all the different ecological roles that would entail.
Where does the best evidence say that? When was Luca alive? How long ago?
So the best evidence is like the canonical answer to that is 3.5 billion years, but it's also like we should be a little bit mindful that it's really hard to make good estimates going that far back.
How do you even what even is the evidence for that? I don't even understand how you can have evidence that it's 3.5 billion years old. And I read it. I'm curious if you saw a paper that came out this year that dated Luca to 4.2 billion years, which is basically like 100 million years after the Earth was formed. I can send it on to you afterwards because I was making.
I think I actually did read that.
Yeah,
I'm on a committee for a student who's working on pushing back these deep time datings pre-Luca. So she's actually trying to work with bacteria and archaeal genes and push back their coalescence to. She's essentially arguing that bacteria and archaea have much deeper roots than we think, which is pretty exciting. It's hard. It's really hard. You can use a variety of molecular clock tools to try to estimate that, and it's really hard because a lot of the classic assumptions of molecular clocks, like fairly consistent rates of molecular change, probably don't hold very well, especially when you start just going back so far, right? It does, on the other hand, kind of line up with fossil evidence. So we actually have like legit fossils of bacteria-like organisms that date back to 3.5 billion years from hydrothermal vents. Like, they look like cells, and they are. It's really hard because a lot of the classic assumptions of molecular clocks, like fairly consistent rates of molecular change, probably don't hold very well, especially when you start just going back so far, right? It does, on the other hand, kind of line up with fossil evidence. So we actually have like legit fossils of bacteria-like organisms that date back to 3.5 billion years from hydrothermal vents. Like, they look like cells. They have they are depleted in 13C. Sorry, yeah, 13C. So carbon is normally 12. It has a molecular weight of 12, right? But you have like this stable carbon isotope that's got an extra neutron in it, behaves just like regular carbon, but biological processes like tend to discriminate against it because it's just like kinetically too big to like get grabbed by enzymes. So it tends to get excluded. And so biological processes fractionate against 13C. So we can actually look isotopically, like in these 3.5 billion year old microbial looking fossils, they're also 13C depleted. So it like really looks like cells.
How does a bacteria fossilize? Because doesn't bone and teeth, and it's usually hard material backbone, sort of skeletal backbone that usually fossilizes. How do you fossilize a?
Definitely. Yeah, so I mean, anything can fossilize. The harder things are, the easier it is, right? There are lots of there's lots of microbial fossils. You just need the right conditions for it.
Cool.
And these were found in like
glaciers and things like this, is it?
Hydrothermal vents, deep sea hydrothermal vents.
Cool.
Yeah, but there are actually you should take a look at some of my favorite fossils are these like 1.6 to 1 billion year old eukaryotic fossils that have been found in like crazy places like, the outback of Australia. And these like 1.6 billion years ago, you have these intercrotonic basins where you have these like shallow seas, and they have such fantastic fossil preservation that you can like dissolve away the rock with hydrofluoric acid, I think, if I'm remembering some talks I've seen. And you get these fossils where you can actually see like the cells, and it looks like you're looking at them under a regular microscope, You can see that some of them are multicellular and like I have cool appendages, and some of this preservation is, or Google the Daoshentu fossils from China. They're like 600 and low 600 million year old fossils where, I mean, they look like animal embryos, but nobody has any idea what they really are. But you can see like subcellular features. Like the level of preservation is just outstanding.
That is very cool.
It's so cool.
What can we learn looking back that far? Again, I'm curious, like how do we connect 4 billion years of history to what's happening now to make advancements in science, to make advancements in any field? What really are the learnings from Luca, how Luca lived, who his friends were, what his environment was, all of those different things?
That's a fantastic question. And I'll preface this by saying I'm not the right person to ask because I don't really work on Luca. I don't work on super deep time stuff. I mean, multicellularity is pretty old, but like it's its own thing, right? And I think we can all understand why. Understanding how
Luca was multicellular though, was he? Or was
single cell.
Okay.
I mean, if it was multicellular, I wouldn't be super surprised given how easy it is to evolve multicellularity, but we don't really have any reason to believe that's true.
Right, okay.
So there's a fundamental sort of like knowledge component to this, right? Like if we want to, I think the origin of life is, if not one of the biggest scientific unknowns, right? And we've made a lot of progress on it in the last several decades, but it still remains something where we're making plausibility arguments rather than arguments about how it exactly happened. Because there's very little information that remains to today that would actually allow us to piece together how chemistry became Darwinian and evolved into the life that we know today.
Right.
And this is, it's a fundamental, just pure knowledge-based scientific question, right? Like, how limiting is the origin of life, right? What are the conditions under which it arises? If you understand how it happened on Earth, you get information about the geological components that sort of played into this. Like how did it happen? Are the conditions under which it occurred special, or are they super common in planets, right? People have made arguments in both directions, but I'm actually I'm very sympathetic to it's not special or particularly hard camp. That like you have planetary scales of time and space, you have fundamental thermodynamic conditions in which energy is being dissipated from planetary cores out into space, essentially via the oxidation of metallic cores, allowing essentially protons to flux from the core out into the proto-oceans and eventually be lost out into space. And so you just have like essentially battery-like conditions where life has a niche for dissipating thermodynamic disequilibria faster than non-life could, and that is coupled to the spread of those chemicals, and that sort of can power the origin of life. But like, how exactly does that occur? It's something that we still like really are working on.
Right.
And so, in terms of big questions, there are fewer that are bigger, and it has a lot of, I think, extrapolation to how common is life in the universe. Like, I tend to think that at least relatively, organisms like up to humans or whatever, like excluding humans, it may not be that hard. Like, I really don't think that any of the priors that we know about are particularly large bottlenecks. Like, you talk about the origin of life itself, it happened early. If it's 3.5 billion years, that's probably a conservative estimate. Origin of life probably was closer to 4.2 billion years. And that's not very long after Earth became habitable, cooling down. I mean, it's only 4.5 billion years old. In the beginning, it was a big ball of molten lava, right? And, to the extent that what are the other sort of big hurdles, right? So it's getting cells which have DNA, something which allows you to have DNA-like encoding of information, ribosome-like use of that digital information for function. Having a cell membrane is critical. That allows you to compress a whole bunch of stuff into one space. That makes cells very effective evolutionary units because they have the information, the capacity to do a lot of stuff. Cells are kind of they're groups in a group selection model. They're groups of like subcellular replicators that are now all selections acting on their traits as a whole, right? Eukaryotic cells are also groups. As much as we don't think of a single eukaryotic cell as being multicellular, a eukaryotic cell is like a complex cell, right? Which has which has a nucleus, which has a bunch of organelles that bacteria and archaea don't have. And it resulted from the symbiosis of a bacteria and archaea, right? Like the mitochondria that are in your body are formerly free-living bacteria. They still have their own genome, although it's highly reduced. They still have their own.
Sorry, it's just another fact that it kind of what, because you live this world so often that you say a lot of things that I think are worth restating because I think they're just staggering. So every human on Earth has a bacterial line of genetics, which are our mitochondria.
Yep.
I believe we always inherit them from our mom. That's correct?
Correct.
You always get them from your mom. That's just one of those things that when I learned it, I was like, everyone should know that. Everyone should know that, but not a lot of people know that. That's profoundly interesting. So that was like the great leap is what they call it, like around 2.3 billion years ago, this phagocytosis event where one big cell ate a smaller one, and that smaller thing is now the powerhouse of all human beings, and not just human beings, but all animals and plants, right? And basically everything.
Everything. Well, not everything. All eukaryotic life.
All eukaryotic.
So
staggeringly interesting. Staggeringly interesting.
There are cool fringe things where some eukaryotes have lost their mitochondria, but most eukaryotes have preserved this symbiosis for 2 billion years. And this is one of these things when people are like freaking out about AI alignment and like, how do we align common interests of things that are fundamentally discrete? Like, man, this is a solved problem in biology. We have a 2 billion year old cooperation that is super stable.
Good point.
And it could probably last till the death of our solar system.
It's an interesting
point. Billions of years to run, right?
And how similar are they really? Like, how similar is that mitochondria to what exists now? I know I'm asking all these questions about what happened 2 billion years ago, and you're going to preface all of them with we don't really know. But how conserved is that mitochondria from 2 billion years ago to today?
Oh, it's super different from its ancestor, right?
Super different.
Its ancestor would probably have had a genome size on the order of 3 million base pairs, which is typical bacteria. And its current genome size, depends on the lineage, is around 25,000 base pairs. So
that's today. Okay, 25,000.
Most of it's
stripped away the parts that aren't needed.
Oh, even better than that. Most of the genes that used to be in the genome of the mitochondria are now residing in the nuclear genome. So like,
interesting.
We've taken control of the tools of gene expression for most of the things, and they are under strict host control.
And it's still utilized within the cell. We haven't stripped it away and lost it because like that symbiotic ecosystem is more fit or confers more fitness than ever losing those compartments.
That's right. Right.
That's so cool. So interesting. Yeah. I didn't know that actually.
If you enjoyed that clip with Dr. Will Radcliffe, an insane evolutionary biologist who's doing crazy things in his lab, I'm so confident that you're going to enjoy our full 2-hour long conversation. You can click it right now here.